Hello YouTube, I'm News Center Maine meteorologist Jason Nappy, tracking Hurricane Lee and its impacts up to New England and also Atlantic Canada. Here are the socials if you want to follow along, updates the next couple of days for sure. Let's get right into the maps. The latest from the hurricane's hunters that are flying into and around the storm. It is still, as of the last update here on your Wednesday, a major hurricane, just barely a Category 3 here. Here are the hurricane hunters now. I've taken the planes and made them bigger here so you can see them. Not obviously that big, but you get the idea here. Let's go ahead and do some of the recon that the hurricane hunters are doing. So you've got a wind speed here at 10-second, 53 miles an hour. That's tropical storm force extending outside of this storm. And with Lee, the wind field is expanding with this storm. It's basically capped in intensity for where it is right now with a larger wind field. It's not going to get to a 4 or back to a 5. It is where he is. Now, there's another plane here to the south of that, east of Turks and Caicos, that's going to fly in, and we'll get a better reading of what's going on as it's going to be passing west of Bermuda here. And now we'll get into the latest, and you can go ahead and grab your favorite beverage, a slice of pizza, or some ice cream. We're going to be here a while as I really break down and deep dive into this storm. So, beach erosion, that's expected, with long duration swells that are just battering the coastline, especially of Maine, and also up to Nova Scotia and heading down the Bay of Fundy. So we'll look at that in more detail in a few minutes. But really, from my experience of working down in Louisiana on the Gulf Coast, 2020 hurricane season, I learned a lot here. And wobbling of 25 miles, 50 miles, that's going to mean a lot as this storm begins to move up to the north now. It's made that turn up to the north. It's also got a large wind field. So with a large wind field from this storm, that limits the high-end potential of this storm, the extreme, the 100, 125 mile an hour situation that's not going to be happening as it moves north. However, still big impacts here, tropical satellite. So I've taken the colors off the infrared. I wanted to show you what's going on with this storm. That little speck up there, that's Bermuda. Down here you have the storm, and around here, this storm has gone through several eye wall replacement cycles here. There's the eye. It's become a bit ragged. It's just holding on. It is clear enough where there is an eye. You can see that, and that is the status and category of a major. This eye is going to close up, though, soon as it heads north, and you see here the good outflow. The storm is breathing very well. You have the hurricane force wind right around here, and then the tropical storm force wind extends hundreds of miles out from the center of the storm. So that's going to have a big impact for us up here in New England and for Atlantic Canada. We'll talk about that in just a second in more detail. So how about high surf and rip currents? That's what I know, definitely going to be happening. It is trending just a bit to the west, and once again, a wobble could certainly increase that threat for Maine as it heads west and also Cape Cod in Massachusetts. I know that this is not going to be like Fiona. Last September, that just battered the Halifax, Prince Edward Island areas and parts of Nova Scotia, and they're still cleaning up for that. So thoughts go out to them there. That was a devastating storm. It won't be quite that bad. Landfall location, no one knows that yet. The Hurricane Center doesn't know. No one knows. We will know that more in the next couple of days. The worst storm surge, don't know where that's going to be because that's dependent on the landfall. It's always going to be to the east, northeast of that, the storm surge in the northeast quadrant of a tropical cyclone. So direct impacts, not exactly known yet either because, once again, don't know the landfall location. So here are the stats that have come in as of the update here on your Wednesday. Wind is still sustained 115, so it's above that 110, 111 threshold for being a major. The wind gusts are holding at 140 miles an hour, so obviously still a very dangerous storm, but right now just affecting shipping routes. Movement to the north-northwest at 9, that's what we've been waiting for it feels like forever, is that movement to the north and northwest. Eventually it's going to change to the north. Pressure, 948 millibars. The last time I talked to you, it was about the same thing, 950 or 953. It's come down a little bit, and it's holding. Now here's the track from the Hurricane Center. Here's the cone of uncertainty. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, 80 mile an hour, just a minimum Category 1 hurricane, that it could be anywhere inside this cone. So it could be east of Cape Cod, it could be south here of Halifax. After it hits that Category 1, now the Hurricane Center still has it as a Category 1 right around down east Maine, over towards Machias, Eastport, as a landfalling potential hurricane, which would be the first time we've had a landfall hurricane in Maine since 1969 and Gerda. And that storm did not have huge impacts, but it certainly was a last landfall hurricane. But I want to point out something here with this cone, the cone of uncertainty. Think about it more like a cone of like a scenario. The center of this storm could be anywhere from east of Portland over towards Rockland all the way back here towards Halifax. That's where the center could be here. That's why it's called the cone of uncertainty. Regardless, by Sunday at 9 o'clock in the morning, the storm is likely extratropical and up towards New Brunswick and out of here, and then long gone after that. So we have to talk about impacts, obviously. First, the steering currents with this storm. So hopefully you got that beverage going or that slice of pizza. This is a little bit more on the complicated side. I'm going to really make it very simple here. So up here, there's an L. That's a trough. That's exiting. That was, a few days ago, expected to take Lee and push it out to sea. You might have heard that on the internet. You might have heard that from a few broadcasters talking about that. I believe that was going to happen a long time ago. But what's going to happen now is looking more and more certain is that high pressure is going to come in and steer Lee towards Nova Scotia or into the eastern Gulf of Maine. And then low pressure behind that, a trough, is going to come in and really scoop it up and get it out of here Sunday. So that's what the steering currents look like right now in the upper levels of the atmosphere, as there has to be some steering with these storms as they move north here. And that's going to all plug into the computer model tracks, as it is going to be west of Bermuda. And here are the tracks. Once again, here's the cone of uncertainty. Here is a cluster of tracks here towards Yarmouth, back towards the Bay of Fundy, and over towards Eastport, Maine. But the center could still be as far west as close to Portland or around the Rockland area. So that's a look at the kind of the closer range stuff. Let's go to the European model here. Big topic of discussion. And you see there was a lot of agreement to the south. But as you get up towards Maine and Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada, obviously these lines, spaghetti, just thrown on the map here. We call them spaghetti plots. So these are called lines of spaghetti, but really kind of like scenarios, think about it. And there's a pretty wide spread. But what I've done is I've taken two arrows and I just drew those lines, right? And where these two clusters are, which is down East Maine over towards Eastport and also down towards Nova Scotia and Yarmouth, that's where the clusters are from the European model right now. And a lot of the models, really. So we're down to pretty much about two scenarios. I do not expect a mid-coast landfall. That would not be the most likely scenario at this time, based on the computer modeling and the steering currents I just showed you. So now let's reset a bit. Let's talk about the water temperature, because that is the biggest driver of keeping tropical systems alive. You need 80 plus, and you have that here. You have 85 east of where Lee is going to be into later today. This storm making that turn to the north. And what happens here as you get later into this week and the weekend, here's the Gulf Stream off the coast of Cape May, New Jersey. That is exactly where it's supposed to be for this time of the year. And what you typically get with New England hurricanes is you get this storm that comes racing up, and it doesn't have time to get into this cooler water to really sit there and fall apart, and it just kind of rips into Nova Scotia or maybe even down East Maine, or it goes out to sea. This one's going to be moving a little bit slower because of that high up to the north. It'll have more time in this cooler water for that wind field to collapse and expand. So that's what you're going to see here on the tropics tracker. We take the European model Friday morning. The rain is not happening yet, but Friday late into Saturday, watch this rain out ahead of the storm start to push into Maine. By Saturday evening, everyone's getting it. Now there's a sharp cutoff here towards Western Mass, Springfield, and over towards just west of Hartford and Connecticut. Very sharp cutoff on the northwest side. But you do see here on the eastern side, you can't see the wind and the waves that much. You can see here the rain bands on the north and northwest side, because this is going to be an extratropical transition of a cyclone. It's going to go from a warm core, the colder air is going to work into it, it gets cut off from the bottom from that warm water that's going to be down where the jet stream and the Gulf Stream is going on. So the jet stream starts to shear this apart a little bit, and it becomes extratropical, and the worst wind is going to be on the western side. So once again, that digging trough is going to come in and kind of mess with the system just a bit. So I've labeled a threat zone that is 3 areas, but really, as far as the landfall goes, It's more about the threat zone being bigger than the actual place where the eye is going to be, or the center of circulation of the storm, okay? Because there won't be an eye by this point. Most likely it's going to be very ragged, completely closed up. So I've taken that threat zone for where the impacts are going to be and made it larger than where the cone of uncertainty is, because the impacts extend far out away from the center of circulation with the storm. And wind is by far going to be one of the biggest impacts with the storm. Look at how big this wind field is. Even though the center of the storm goes west of Bermuda, that dot right there, you have a huge wind field. So this, I'll talk about the kind of like a pancake analogy. If you had a real small hurricane that was vertically stacked very well, like silver dollar pancakes, it would be very small, very tightly packed. This is more like one big pancake or one big pizza. It's flat. It's not going to have that high-end wind that I talked about. It's going to be a lot lower, but still is formidable. It is still going to have a lot of power with it. But as it gets here cut off from all of that warm water, what happens is the wind field is going to collapse, so you don't see these pinks and reds getting on shore that much. It'll be more of a 40, 50 mile an hour thing instead of a 70, 80, 90 mile per hour thing. And that will transition well here to the next graphic I've made. These are the wind gusts from the European model, which is the slower model, which is the track more to the west, which means more wind to the west. And we can handle 40 miles an hour here in Maine. But when we start to get Saturday evening to the mid-50s along the immediate coastline here, that could have problems with our saturated soils. We've had one of the rainiest summers on record. So obviously the root system is not locked in like it normally would be. We also have a lot of leaves on the trees. So we have to watch that very closely as the storm, once again, potentially could make a little landfall here or go extra tropical and get on as a nor'easter. You have that northeast wind, but then it goes northwest like a departing nor'easter would in the fall, or more likely in the wintertime around here. But still, 30 mile an hour sustained wind, a downsloping wind at that point. So got to watch out to see what's going on in the mountains as we get into Sunday morning. So let's talk about rain. This storm is going to bring a lot of rain, but I talked about the position being very important here. So let's say the center is right here where the models are kind of averaging it out to be. So on the northwest side and north side, that's where you're going to get, with an extratropical cyclone, with a nor'easter, you get the worst rain, okay? The worst wind and surge is normally on the eastern side, northeast quadrant, but the worst rain, with those saturated soils running high and the rivers running high, mid-coast Maine, down east Maine. That's what we have to watch out for, is the rain in the hour-by-hour forecast. And it gets heavy starting Saturday morning at about, call it after daybreak or so. You're thinking about going out and doing some things. Well, I can tell you that if the storm is this close by Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning, you're seeing the greens and yellows pop up. A very consistent, persistent rain. Not talking about tropical downpours that are going to be in tropical rain bands like we've kind of seen this summer with all of the flash flooding. This will be very consistent and very persistent and last all day Saturday into Saturday night. And then the storm is out of here on Sunday by noon. It's still raining up in Caribou, but the storm is winding down. So rainfall amounts, here's just the first stab at it from the European model, with that slower westerly track here on the northwest side, anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 inches or more locally, which obviously on top of saturated soils is not going to help things. This could cause some big problems as we get later into Saturday and deal with that runoff into Sunday morning. And the waves. Cannot forget about the high seas from this storm. And this is where we're going to have issues around potentially 10, 15, 20 or more feet Saturday afternoon here. Southern coast, not as much. A little protection here from Cape Cod, but definitely mid-coast to down east is where you would get those seas to rise. And also here, can't forget about Atlantic Canada up towards Halifax. They'll get a brunt of it, and they'll get the worst surge there too in the northeast quadrant over towards the Halifax and Yarmouth area. So here's what you need to know. First, I just want to say that, yes, hurricanes and tropical systems, their job is to take the latent heat from the equator and send it to the poles. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. That's the job. So this is normal stuff here. this is what's going to happen as we get into Saturday and Saturday night. As all of that latent heat, all of that energy, the heavy rain, the high wind gets pulled up north, the waves and the swells, I recommend securing boats if you haven't already. A lot of people talking about they've already gone ahead and done that. Trim those limbs if you can get out there in between the rain we're having right now. Clear the drains out. Some of the leaves are coming off the trees. So go ahead and do that because we're going to have a lot more leaves come down even though we're not in obviously peak fall conditions yet. And just have a plan in place. If a watch or warning is issued, and they likely will be as we get 36 to 48 hours out from the storm, it's a good time to have a plan in place. I thank you so much for watching, following along social media, Twitter, X, wherever you want to call it, Facebook, Instagram. You can find me on TikTok if you look hard enough, and I'll have more updates as we get through the rest of the next couple of days, and I'll be here all weekend on News Center Maine tracking the storm.